Somewhere in Los Angeles right now, there is a phone that will not stop buzzing. On the other end of those calls are two of the most powerful men in American business, and they just did something nobody saw coming. They bought the Lakers. Not last year. Not 5 years from now. Right now, in the middle of August, while the ink on the previous sale was barely dry. And if you think that is where this story ends, you are wrong. Because behind the scenes, two other names are sitting in a much more uncomfortable position. Jeanie Buss, the woman who has protected this franchise like it was her own child for over a decade. And Rob Pelinka, the man who just spent an entire summer rebuilding this roster from scratch, only to find out the ground beneath his feet might not be his anymore. Stick around, because what is happening with the Lakers right now is unlike anything this league has ever seen. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why insiders are calling this the most dangerous week in franchise history. Let's rewind for a second, because to understand how strange this moment really is, you need to understand where this all started. Picture Los Angeles in the late 1970s. A businessman named Jack Kent Cooke owns the Lakers, but his personal life is falling apart. A messy divorce drains his finances, and he is forced to sell off everything he built, the Lakers, the Kings, and the arena they play in, all in one enormous package deal. The man who steps up to buy it is a chemist turned real estate mogul named Jerry Buss. He pays $67.5 million for the whole bundle. Just $16 million of that is for the Lakers themselves. At the time, that seemed like an enormous risk. Nobody could have imagined what that $16 million bet would eventually become. Jerry Buss did not just own the Lakers, he transformed them. Under his leadership, the franchise becomes a factory of champions. Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Later, Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. 10 championships arrive between the time Buss takes over and the time he passes away in 2013. The Lakers are not just a basketball team anymore. They are a cultural institution, a symbol of Los Angeles itself, wrapped up in purple and gold. When Jerry Buss dies, control of the team passes to his daughter, Jeanie. And this is where the story gets personal, because running the Lakers as a Buss family member was never going to be simple. Jeanie inherits not just a franchise, but a legacy, an entire city's expectations, and a family business with other siblings who had their own opinions about how things should be run. She fights through internal family battles to secure her position as the team's controlling governor. She becomes, in many ways, the guardian of her father's dream. For over a decade, through championship runs and painful rebuilds, Jeanie Buss is the one constant at the top of the Lakers organization. Now fast forward through the years. LeBron James arrives in 2018, bringing a championship in the pandemic bubble season of 2020, the 17th in franchise history. But after that title, things get complicated. The roster ages. Injuries pile up. Playoff exits become earlier and more frustrating each year. And at the center of the front office, making the calls, taking the criticism, and trying to find a way forward, is Rob Pelinka, the man Jeanie Buss trusted to run basketball operations. Pelinka's job is not an easy one. Every trade he makes gets dissected by millions of fans. Every draft pick gets graded before the player even steps on an NBA court. And then, in February of 2025, Pelinka makes the boldest move of his entire career. He trades away Anthony Davis, a former MVP candidate and one of the most dominant big men in the league, in a deal that brings back Donic from the Dallas Mavericks. To call this shocking would be an understatement. Donic is one of the biggest superstars in basketball, a 5-time All-NBA first-team guard still in his 20s. Trading for a player like that, especially one who was seen as untouchable in Dallas, sends shockwaves through the entire league. Some analysts call it the most stunning trade in modern NBA history. But adding a superstar does not fix everything overnight. The Lakers, now built around Donic and Austin Reeves, still have to figure out how to construct a team capable of winning at the highest level. And this is where Pelinka's patience becomes a talking point. Throughout the following season, the Lakers stay relatively quiet at the trade deadline, making only a minor move, sending out a second-round pick to bring in shooter Luke Kennard. Pelinka defends this decision publicly, insisting that saying no to certain deals is its own form of aggression, a way of protecting the roster's long-term flexibility rather than making a panic move. Not everyone buys that explanation. The Lakers get knocked out in the first round of the playoffs by the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the frustration among fans and analysts grows louder. Pelinka himself compares the process of building around Donic mid-season to trying to construct an airplane while it is already flying through the sky. It is a vivid image, and it captures exactly how chaotic that stretch of the season feels for everyone involved. Then comes the summer of 2026, and this is where the story really starts accelerating. Pelinka enters the offseason with more advantages than he has ever had before. The roster, outside of the Donic and Reeves partnership, is essentially wide open. There are a few lingering contracts that nobody loves, like the extension handed to Jared Vanderbilt or the player option given to DeAndre Ayton. But for the most part, Pelinka has a blank canvas. The team is sitting on roughly $47 million in cap space. On top of that, the Lakers hold 3 tradable first-round picks, giving Pelinka real ammunition to make aggressive moves if he chooses to. And then something else happens that changes everything. LeBron James, the same man who helped deliver that championship back in 2020, announces in July that he is leaving the Lakers. After 8 seasons in Los Angeles, the all-time leading scorer in NBA history signs with the Philadelphia 76ers on a modest 2-year deal. For a franchise that has been built around LeBron's presence for nearly a decade, this is the end of an era. The keys to the franchise are now fully, officially, in the hands of Luka Donic. This is the moment Pelinka has been waiting for. With LeBron gone and cap space open, he finally gets to build a roster shaped entirely around his new franchise player. And he does not waste any time. First, he executes a trade to bring in center Walker Kessler, finally giving the Lakers a legitimate rim-protecting big man, something the roster has been missing since the Anthony Davis trade. Then the free agency dominoes start falling. Colin Sexton signs on. Sandro Mamukelashvili joins the frontcourt rotation. Quentin Grimes arrives to add wing depth and shooting. The moves keep coming. Kevin Looney is brought in as another steady presence at center. Zaire Williams and Matisse Thybulle add athleticism and defense on the wing. And throughout all of this, the front office keeps a close eye on restricted free agent Jonathan Kuminga, watching to see if there is a path to add him to the roster as well. For Lakers fans who had spent years wondering if Pelinka could ever fully commit to a rebuild around a new star, this summer feels like vindication. A fan survey conducted shortly after the flurry of moves shows an overwhelming shift in public opinion. Only a small fraction, around 5%, say their view of Pelinka has gotten worse. The vast majority are impressed. He landed a genuine starting caliber center, something the franchise had been chasing for years. He kept Austin Reeves in the fold. He added a wave of new talent around Donic. Even Donic himself reportedly expresses excitement about the direction of the roster. For the first time in a long time, it looks like Rob Pelinka has earned the trust of the fanbase. But here is the thing about the Lakers. Just when everything seems to be settling into place, this franchise finds a way to blow the entire story wide open. And that is exactly what happens on a Wednesday morning in the middle of August 2026. Without warning, without leaks building up over weeks, without the usual slow drip of rumors that normally precede a story this big, the news breaks all at once. The Los Angeles Lakers are being sold. Again. And this time, the number attached to the sale is almost impossible to process. $12.5 billion. Not million. Billion. It is, by a wide margin, the largest price ever paid for a franchise in the history of professional sports. To understand how staggering this is, you have to remember something. It was barely a year earlier that Mark Walter, the businessman who also owns the Los Angeles Dodgers, purchased a controlling interest in the Lakers from the Buss family. That deal valued the franchise at around $10 billion, a record at the time. The agreement was not even formally approved by the league until the end of October 2025. Walter had been the Lakers' majority owner for less than a full year. And now, just months later, he is selling the team for $2.5 billion more than he paid for it. The buyers are 2 names that will be instantly familiar if you follow business news, even if you have never once thought of them in connection with basketball. The first is Bob Iger, the legendary former chief executive of Disney, a man who ran one of the largest entertainment companies on the planet, not once, but twice, stepping down from that role earlier in the year. The second is Josh Kushner, founder of the investment firm Thrive Capital, co-founder of the health insurance company Oscar Health. And yes, the younger brother of Jared Kushner, son-in-law to President Donald Trump. Kushner has been circling the basketball world for a while now, previously holding a minority stake in the Memphis Grizzlies and picking up a small piece of the Miami Heat. His wife, supermodel Karlie Kloss, even holds a limited partnership stake in the WNBA's New York Liberty. Both Kushner and Iger had actually been involved in discussions about a completely different project, an NBA expansion franchise being planned for Las Vegas. But somewhere along the way, their focus pivoted. Instead of building something new from scratch in Nevada, they decided to go after the most storied franchise in the sport. In a joint statement released after the news broke, Kushner and Iger call it one of the great honors of their lives to become stewards of the Los Angeles Lakers. They speak with deep respect about the legacy of Jerry and Jeanie Buss, promising to build on that foundation while competing for championships and serving the city of Los Angeles. Mark Walter, for his part, releases his own statement, calling his time owning the Lakers one of the great honors of his life, thanking Jeanie Buss, the Buss family, the players, and the staff for welcoming him into what he calls this chapter of the franchise's story. He insists the Lakers belong to Los Angeles, and that he has full confidence the best days are still ahead. Walter will keep his ownership of the Dodgers, but the Lakers, the team he only just took control of, now belongs to someone else entirely. Even Luka Donic reacts publicly. The Lakers' new franchise cornerstone, especially after LeBron's departure, takes to social media to share his excitement about meeting the new ownership group, saying that being a Laker means everything to him and that he is ready to help bring a championship back to Los Angeles. He adds that he has grown used to major changes over the last few years, but believes there is no limit to what this franchise can become. Now here is where the plot thickens even further, because this sale is not happening in a vacuum. There is a detail lurking underneath all of this that makes the timing feel far less like a coincidence and far more like a calculated exit. Mark Walter, at the very moment of this sale, is reportedly the subject of a federal investigation looking into whether he properly disclosed loans connected to his various companies. Now, to be clear, nobody involved has confirmed that this investigation is the reason behind the sale, and Walter's companies have firmly denied any wrongdoing. But you cannot ignore the optics. A man buys a historic sports franchise for a record price, holds it for less than a year, and then sells it for an even bigger record price right as scrutiny around his business dealings intensifies. Whether these two threads are connected or simply an odd twist of timing, it adds a layer of intrigue that has NBA insiders buzzing. So what does this mean for the people actually running the Lakers day to day? This is the question everyone in Los Angeles wants answered, and it starts with Jeanie Buss. For over a decade, Jeanie has been the emotional and organizational anchor of this franchise. She survived internal family disputes to secure her position. She weathered championship droughts, coaching changes, front office shakeups, and constant public scrutiny, all while carrying the weight of her father's legacy on her shoulders. When Mark Walter bought his controlling stake in 2025, part of the agreement reportedly allowed Jeanie to remain in her position as the team's governor for the next 5 years. It was a deal that gave fans some comfort. Even with new money coming in, the Buss family's presence and Jeanie's guiding hand would remain part of the franchise's identity. Now that Iger and Kushner have stepped in as the new owners, they have publicly stated they intend to honor that same agreement, allowing Jeanie to continue in her role. On paper, that sounds like stability. But anyone who has watched professional sports ownership changes before knows that promises made in a press release during the honeymoon phase of a sale do not always hold up once the new owners settle in and start making their own decisions. Jeanie Buss may keep her title, but titles and actual influence are not always the same thing when a franchise changes hands for over $12 billion. And then there is Rob Pelinka, the man whose entire summer of work just got completely overshadowed by a headline he never saw coming. Just weeks earlier, insiders were praising Pelinka for delivering one of the best off-seasons of his career. He had built a roster fans were genuinely excited about. He had earned back trust that had eroded over years of criticism. And now, in an instant, all of that hard-earned goodwill is being overshadowed by a single, uncomfortable question. Does the new ownership group even want him around? Industry insiders following the situation closely are already sounding the alarm. One senior NBA analyst put it bluntly during a recent conversation about the sale, explaining that whenever new ownership groups take over a franchise, they typically want to make changes of their own, and that Pelinka, given this dynamic, could find himself on what amounts to a very short leash. Think about what that means for a second. Pelinka just spent an entire summer building relationships with new players, negotiating contracts, constructing a locker room culture around Luka Donic, only to now face the very real possibility that his own job security is completely up in the air, dependent entirely on how quickly two brand. New owners decide whether they want to keep him or bring in someone of their own choosing. This is the brutal reality of professional sports ownership. It does not matter how good your off-season was. It does not matter how many fans came around to supporting you. When billions of dollars change hands and new owners walk through the door, everyone below them, from front office executives to coaches to sometimes even players, becomes a question mark. New owners want to leave their own fingerprint on an organization. Sometimes that means keeping the people already in place because they are performing well. Other times, it means a clean sweep, a fresh start, new voices making the decisions. So what happens next? Nobody knows for certain, and that is exactly what makes this moment in Lakers history so tense. Will Bob Iger and Josh Kushner walk in and immediately reaffirm Rob Pelinka's role, trusting the momentum he just built with the Donic-era roster? Or will they use their first months of ownership to bring in their own trusted basketball minds, restructuring the front office from top to bottom? Will Jeanie Buss's promised 5-year agreement to remain governor hold firm? Or will subtle shifts in power slowly move real decision-making authority away from the family that built this dynasty in the first place? There are a few things we do know. We know that this new ownership group is paying an enormous premium for this franchise. Over $2.5 billion more than what Mark Walter paid barely a year prior. When investors pay that kind of premium, they typically do not sit back quietly. They expect results, and they expect them relatively quickly. We know that Luka Donic, now the unquestioned face of the franchise following LeBron's departure, will be watching closely to see how stable his new working environment actually is. Star players notice instability at the top. They notice when front offices are unsettled, when job security becomes uncertain for the people they work with every single day. If Donic senses chaos brewing above him, that could shape decisions he makes down the road about his own long-term future in Los Angeles. We also know that this Lakers roster, freshly built around Donic and Reeves with new additions like Walker Kessler, Colin Sexton, and the rest of the summer signings, is entering a season under a completely different ownership structure than the one that constructed it. Every trade discussion, every extension negotiation, every major basketball decision from this point forward will be happening under the watchful eyes of Kushner and Iger, two men who, until a few months ago, were focused on building an entirely different franchise from scratch in Las Vegas. Think about the whiplash of that reality for a moment. Two men prepare for months to launch a brand new expansion team, something built entirely from their own vision from day one, and instead end up as the owners of one of the most storied tradition-heavy franchises in all of professional sports, complete with an existing front office, an existing roster, an existing coaching staff, and an existing power structure that has been in place for over a decade. That is an enormous adjustment, not just for them, but for everyone already working inside the organization. There is also the matter of what this sale says about where professional sports as an industry is heading. $12.5 billion for a single franchise is a number that would have seemed almost fictional just a few years ago. It signals just how valuable premier sports franchises have become to ultra-wealthy investors looking for long-term assets. The Lakers, with their global brand recognition, their history of championships, their connection to Hollywood and the entertainment industry, and now their new superstar in Luka Donic, represent one of the most desirable properties in the entire sports world. Bob Iger, with his decades of experience running one of the largest entertainment conglomerates on the planet, understands better than almost anyone alive how to build and protect a global brand. Pairing that expertise with Josh Kushner's investment background creates a partnership that could reshape how the Lakers operate as a business, well beyond just basketball decisions. But business decisions and basketball decisions do not always align smoothly, and that tension is exactly where Jeanie Buss and Rob Pelinka now find themselves standing. Jeanie has spent her entire adult life protecting the basketball side of this organization, making sure that even amid ownership changes, the on-court product and the franchise's championship culture remained the top priority. Pelinka has tried to build a roster capable of delivering that 18th championship, the one that would tie the Lakers with the Boston Celtics for the most titles in NBA history. Both of them now have to prove their value all over again, this time to owners who did not hire them, who did not build a relationship with them over years, and who have every incentive in the world to make bold, headline-grabbing moves of their own to justify the record-breaking price they just paid. If you are a Lakers fan watching all of this unfold, you are probably feeling a strange mix of emotions right now. Excitement, because new ownership with this level of financial firepower could mean even more aggressive moves in the future, more resources poured into the roster, more ambition at the top. But also anxiety, because uncertainty at the ownership level often trickles down into instability throughout an entire organization. The very people who just built what looked like a promising new era around Donic might not be the ones who get to see that vision through. There is a strange symmetry to this entire situation if you step back and look at the bigger picture. Jerry Buss bought this franchise decades ago as part of a larger business deal, almost as an afterthought compared to the arena and the hockey team included in the same purchase. Nobody could have predicted that small real estate deal would grow into a 16-time championship dynasty and eventually sell for over $12 billion. Now, history is repeating itself in a strange, accelerated way. Ownership is changing hands again, quickly, dramatically, and the people who built the current chapter of this story, Jeanie Buss holding the family legacy together, Rob Pelinka constructing a roster around a new generational superstar, are left waiting to see whether the next chapter includes them at all. What happens over these next few weeks and months will define the direction of this franchise for years to come. Will Bob Iger and Josh Kushner move quickly to make sweeping changes, eager to put their own stamp on this new billion-dollar acquisition? Or will they take a patient, hands-off approach, trusting the current leadership that just delivered one of the most talked-about off-seasons in recent Lakers memory? Will Jeanie Buss's 5-year governance agreement truly hold, giving the Buss family a continued voice in the organization her father built from nothing? Or will subtle power shifts begin almost immediately, reshaping who really controls the direction of this storied franchise? One thing is certain. The Lakers, a franchise that has never been able to stay quiet for very long, have once again found themselves at the center of the biggest story in professional sports. A record-breaking sale. A front office built on uncertain ground. A superstar in Donic watching closely to see what kind of organization he has truly signed up to lead. And two men, Jeanie Buss and Rob Pelinka, who spent years, in some cases decades, building this version of the Lakers, now forced to prove all over again that they still belong at the center of it. More moves are coming. That much is certain. Whether those moves strengthen the foundation that Jeanie Buss and Rob Pelinka have built, or completely dismantle it in favor of a new vision from Kushner and Iger, remains one of the most fascinating unanswered questions in sports right now. And when those moves finally happen, you can be sure the entire basketball world will be watching, waiting to see if the Lakers, once again, find a way to turn chaos into another chapter of greatness, or whether this record-breaking sale marks the beginning of the most turbulent era this franchise has faced since Jerry Buss first bought the team all those decades ago. For now, all we can do is watch, wait, and remember that in the history of the Los Angeles Lakers, the biggest stories always seem to arrive when nobody expects them. This one is far from over. Let's take a step back and really sit with the human side of this, because it is easy to talk about billions of dollars and ownership structures and forget that real people are living through this whiplash in real time. Imagine being Rob Pelinka for a moment. You spend your entire summer, every single day, on the phone with agents, flying to meet with free agents, running numbers on cap space, trying to convince players like Walker Kessler and Colin Sexton that Los Angeles is the right home for them. You finally pull it off. You finally build a roster that has fans, media, and even your own star player publicly excited. You take a breath, maybe for the first time in months, thinking the hardest part is behind you. And then, out of nowhere, a headline drops that has nothing to do with basketball at all, and suddenly your entire future with the organization you have poured years of your life into is uncertain again. Now imagine being Jeanie Buss. This is not just a business for her. This is her father's life work. This is the team she fought to keep control of during family disputes that played out, at times, painfully in public. This is the organization she has represented at championship parades and at the lowest moments of coaching changes and roster teardowns. She agreed to a deal just months ago that was supposed to guarantee her a defined role for the next 5 years. And now, before that agreement has even had time to settle in, an entirely new set of owners is walking through the door. Owners who did not make that promise to her personally, who inherited it as part of a deal, and who will ultimately decide for themselves how much that promise is truly worth. This is the part of sports business that rarely gets talked about on highlight shows or in quick social media reactions. Ownership changes are not just financial transactions. They are earthquakes that ripple through every level of an organization. Coaches wonder if their system will still be trusted. Front office staff wonder if their roles will still exist in 6 months. Scouts wonder if the new group will bring in their own scouting department. Even players, especially a franchise player like Luka Donic, start paying closer attention to every signal coming out of the organization, because stability at the top usually translates into stability throughout the roster, and instability at the top can quietly poison a locker room before a single game is even played. Let's talk about what history tells us about situations like this, because the Lakers are not the first franchise to experience a rapid change in ownership right after a major roster overhaul. Time and time again across professional sports, we have seen new owners come in and immediately want to make their presence felt. Sometimes that looks like keeping the existing basketball operations team in place for a season or two, giving them a chance to prove themselves under the new regime, almost like an audition. Other times, new owners move fast, bringing in their own trusted executives within months, even if the previous front office had just delivered a strong season or a promising off-season. There is no universal playbook here. Every ownership group is different, shaped by their own personalities, their own risk tolerance, and their own vision for what they want the franchise to become. What makes the Kushner and Iger situation particularly interesting is the mix of backgrounds they bring to the table. Bob Iger did not build his career in sports. He built it in entertainment, running one of the largest media companies on the planet, a company built on decades of storytelling, brand management, and long-term strategic thinking. When Iger looks at the Lakers, he is not just looking at a basketball roster. He is looking at one of the most recognizable global brands in all of sports, a brand with box office level star power in Luka Donic, a brand with deep ties to the entertainment capital of the world. It would not be surprising if Iger's instincts lean toward protecting and elevating that brand identity, which could mean valuing continuity and stability, at least in the short term, rather than making abrupt changes that could disrupt the momentum the team has just built heading into this season. Josh Kushner, on the other hand, comes from the world of venture capital and high-growth investing. His entire career has been built around identifying undervalued opportunities and pushing them toward maximum growth as quickly as possible. That kind of background often comes with a bias toward action, toward making bold moves rather than sitting back and waiting to see how things unfold naturally. If Kushner's instincts guide the direction of this new ownership group, we could see a much more aggressive approach to reshaping the front office, potentially sooner rather than later. Of course, we do not yet know exactly how these two very different backgrounds will blend together as co-owners, or how much say each of them will have in day-to-day basketball decisions compared to broader business strategy. What we do know is that both men now have direct financial incentive to make sure this investment pays off, and pays off in a way that justifies the record-breaking price tag they just agreed to. $12.5 billion is not the kind of number you spend to maintain the status quo. It is the kind of number you spend when you believe you can build something even bigger than what already exists. So where does that leave the roster heading into this season? Despite all of this front office uncertainty, the players themselves still have a job to do. Luka Donic and Austin Reeves are still expected to lead this team on the court, regardless of who signs their paychecks at the top. Walker Kessler is still expected to anchor the paint defensively, giving the Lakers a rim-protecting presence they have desperately needed since trading away Anthony Davis. Colin Sexton, Sandro Mamukelashvili, and Quentin Grimes are still expected to fill their roles, providing scoring, front-court depth, and perimeter shooting respectively. Kevin Looney brings his championship experience to the center rotation, while Zaire Williams and Matisse Thybulle add versatility and defensive intensity on the wing. On the surface, none of that changes just because the ownership group above them has been replaced. But basketball has never existed in a vacuum, separate from the business decisions happening in boardrooms. Player morale, contract negotiations, extension conversations, trade deadline strategy, all of it filters down from the top. If Pelinka remains in his role and receives a vote of confidence from the new owners, the front office can continue building with the same continuity that made this past off-season so successful. If instead the new ownership group decides to bring in their own basketball leadership, even midway through a season, that kind of transition can create disruption at exactly the moment when a team built around a new superstar needs stability the most. There is also the question of what this means for future trade deadlines and off-seasons. Remember, the Lakers still hold valuable draft capital, those 3 tradable first-round picks Pelinka has been sitting on. Under his leadership, the plan seemed to be using that capital strategically, waiting for the right opportunity to package those assets into a move that genuinely elevates the roster around Donic, rather than spending them reactively just to make headlines. Would a new front office regime, installed by Kushner and Iger, share that same philosophy? Or would new decision-makers, eager to prove themselves quickly to their new bosses, be more inclined to spend those assets aggressively and immediately, chasing a splashy move to signal that big changes have arrived? These are the kinds of questions that will only be answered with time, but they matter enormously for how this era of Lakers basketball unfolds. Donic is still in his 20s, still considered one of the most gifted offensive talents the league has ever produced. The Lakers have him under contract for years to come, giving this new ownership group a genuine window to build a sustained championship contender if they play their cards right. But windows like that can close quickly if instability at the top translates into poor decision-making on the court, whether that comes from rushed trades, inconsistent front office direction, or a locker room distracted by questions about who is actually running the organization. Let's also not forget about the coaching staff in all of this. Whoever is patrolling the sideline this season inherited a roster built by Pelinka's vision, tailored specifically around Donic's strengths and the surrounding pieces added this summer. Coaching continuity matters just as much as front office continuity when it comes to building chemistry with a newly reshaped roster. If ownership turmoil eventually trickles down into coaching changes as well, that would represent an even deeper level of disruption for a team that is really only just beginning this new chapter of its identity following LeBron James's departure. Speaking of LeBron, it is worth pausing on just how symbolic his exit truly was. For 8 seasons, the Lakers' entire organizational identity revolved around accommodating and maximizing the greatness of the league's all-time leading scorer. Every roster decision, every coaching philosophy, every marketing campaign, in some way connected back to LeBron James wearing purple and gold. His departure to Philadelphia this past July did not just end an era on the court, it forced the front office, and really the entire organization, to redefine itself completely. Pelinka's aggressive off-season moves this summer were, in many ways, the first real glimpse of what a post-LeBron Lakers franchise looks like, built entirely around Donic's timeline instead. And now, almost immediately after that new identity started to take shape, the ownership group overseeing the entire operation has changed as well. It is as if the franchise is being asked to answer 2 enormous identity questions at the exact same time. Who are we as a team without LeBron? And who are we as an organization under completely new ownership? If you zoom out even further, there is something almost poetic about the timing of all of this. The Lakers spent decades under one family's stewardship, defined by continuity, by a shared vision passed down from Jerry Buss to Jeanie Buss. That continuity gave the organization a kind of identity that other franchises, ones that changed hands more frequently, often struggled to maintain. Now, in the span of just over a year, the franchise has been sold twice. Its biggest superstar has departed, a new superstar has arrived through a blockbuster trade, and an entirely new roster has been constructed around him. This is not incremental change. This is a franchise being completely rebuilt at every single level simultaneously, from the players on the court to the executives in the front office to the billionaires signing the checks at the very top. For longtime Lakers fans who grew up watching this franchise value stability and continuity above almost everything else, this moment probably feels disorienting. But it also represents something else, an enormous opportunity. New ownership with this level of financial resources, paired with a generational talent like Luka Donic already in place, creates the kind of foundation that could produce sustained championship contention for years to come, if the pieces are managed correctly. The question is simply whether the people who built the current foundation, Jeanie Buss and Rob Pelinka, will be the ones trusted to keep building on it, or whether Kushner and Iger will decide the moment calls for entirely new architects. Either way, one truth remains constant through every era of this franchise's history. The Lakers do not stay quiet for long. Whether it is a blockbuster trade for a generational superstar, the surprise departure of an all-time great, or a record-breaking sale that reshapes the entire ownership landscape of professional sports, this organization consistently finds itself at the center of the basketball world's attention. As this new chapter begins, with new owners settling in, a front office waiting to learn its fate, and a roster built around a new franchise cornerstone, the entire league will be watching to see what comes next. And if the history of this franchise has taught us anything, it is that whatever comes next will almost certainly be bigger, bolder, and more unpredictable than anyone currently expects.